This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. StoryBeat episodes are widely available at StoryBeat.net, on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and on numerous other podcast apps and platforms. Won't you please take a moment to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts? My guest today, music producer, musician, songwriter, arranger, sound engineer, and consummate artist, Stephan Oberhoff, has performed with, produced for, and collaborated with a who's who of music legends, including Quincy Jones, Burt Bacharach, Stevie Wonder, Jarreau, Mann and Cynthia Weil, Melissa Manchester, Patti Austin, and many more. Though he's mastered a wide range of disciplines within the music creation process, at heart, he's a musician with renowned skills as a keyboard player capable of creating a full orchestra, Brazilian band, contemporary jazz section, or country rhythm section at his fingertips. Stephan is also an exceptional guitarist, drummer, accordion player, bass player, percussionist, saxophonist, and vocalist. A native of Germany, Stephan moved to Hollywood in the early 1990s and began collaborating with internationally acclaimed artists and writers like Brenda Russell, Siedah Garrett, Michael Ruff, Sharon Vaughn, and many of the biggest songwriters in the world. Stephan's credits include producing, arranging, and performing on Brenda Russell's critically acclaimed Paris Rain record, and producing, arranging, and performing on Melissa Manchester's When I Look Down That Road. Current projects include collaborating with the legendary Quincy Jones on Quest Records'Jason Gould album, Dangerous Man. Stephan produced, arranged, engineered, and performed all songs from Jason's current release. Stephan has co-produced, performed, and collaborated with Johnny Mercer Award-winning composer and two-time StoryBeat guest, Michele Brourman, on multiple award-winning animated musicals for film and TV, including Universal Studios' Land Before Time, Disney's BaltoIIand III, American Tail 4, Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, and Hercules and Xena. Other notable clients include producing, arranging, and performing credits with another favorite StoryBeat guest, Amanda McBroom, as well as with Jeffrey Osborne and other extraordinary pop, jazz, and R&B greats. Please be sure to stick around at the end of the show to hear Stephan's exquisite cover of Michele Brourman's well-known song, My Favorite Year. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly thrilled to welcome one of the very best producers working in today's music industry, Stephan Oberhoff, to StoryBeat. Stephan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, believe me. So let's go back to your beginnings. Tell us a bit about your history. Where did your love of music come from? Where did it start?
Oh, I think it began pretty much when I was a restless 2 or 3 year old, and I would always lie in bed and kind of roll my head around and sing like crazy rhythms and crazy words in order to kind of be able to sleep. It was just I was a very hyperactive kid. And you were already creating music when you were just a baby, basically. Yeah, that's the odd part, because it was always kind of melodic kind of things, and they involved like body movement and just. There was always grooves in it, always rhythms in it somehow, rhythm and melody. Seemed to be the one thing that kind of calmed me down and enabled me to sleep.
So did your mother sing to you as well?
Well, there was a lot of music in our household. I don't remember particularly much of my mom singing, because my memories back when I was a 3 or 4 year old are very nebulous, except that I remember singing these things to myself. But my mom and my dad both were musicians. My mom played a multitude of instruments, sang in the church choir, as did my dad. And my dad was also a gifted pianist with perfect pitch.
Wow.
The kind of perfect pitch that we call sick. I remember sitting with him when we met when I was already an adult, and we sat in a restaurant that had a beautiful sort of blown glass lampshade in front of it, like that hung very low over the table. And my dad took a fork and struck it. And he said, "Do you hear that? That's an A sharp, but there's a very high C sharp as an overtone, about 3 octaves above. Do you hear that?" And I'm going like, "Dad, you're way ahead of me."
Well, yeah, that's amazing. He had literally perfect pitch.
Yes, he did.
And so you were surrounded by musicians then. Wasn't new to you. It wasn't something you yearned for but didn't know anything about.
I thought, most of the educators that I know emphasize the meaning of the word, coming from I think it's either a Latin root or a Greek root. Educare means to bring out what's within. So it only has to be resonated awake. So it's already within you. I'm firmly convicted of that your music is already within you, and that it needs sometimes either life circumstance or another type of music to come in from the outside and trigger that and shake that awake.
I love that. That's very interesting. Are you suggesting that everybody has music within them?
I'm 100% convinced of that.
That's fascinating.
It's just not that everybody gets the right trigger from life to have that come through. And then, our conceptual thinking often gets in the way, and we compare and despair and so forth. It is, that may be why a lot of people don't try, but I believe that, age is no limit when it comes to that. And that it requires almost like they say allergies, for example, sometimes have a genetic component.
Yes.
and a life event trigger.
Interesting. It is helpful as a young person to develop your talent early, though, isn't it? It's helpful.
It is very helpful, yes, because you're quicker. Your absorption and retention, I think, is a lot higher.
Okay, so who were your earliest, aside from your parents, obviously, who were your earliest inspirations and influences? What musicians did you listen to early on?
Well, it's kind of interesting because my dad took me to the piano once when I was 6, and he struck a couple of notes, and he said, "Sing this note," and I just hit it like absolutely 100% each time he did it. He said, "Okay, this guy's going to have piano lessons." He was wise enough not to teach me himself, because my dad had a bit of a temper and a little bit of a short patience span, if you will. And so he passed me on to a neighbor who then very patiently taught me. And I got a very strict classical teacher after that time, who was not very, how should I say this? Not very safe to be around a young person, because he was kind of the kind of teacher that could easily stifle you, because he also had a lack of patience. And it was all that classical stuff. All I wanted to play was Crocodile Rock from Elton John.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to play.
And they wanted you to play the classical music.
Absolutely, all this, and I wanted to play. That's what I wanted to play.
Well, I think you've done the right thing by figuring that out early on. Did you get formal training at some point? Did you go to school for it?
Only in those 3 years. Like my teacher was always say, "All right, the fingering with the thumb, that funny thumb movement," which I still pretty much, have deficiencies at. But that was pretty much the entire extent of training. However, when I came to the U.S., I was already 31 when I came out for post-secondary studies at the Grove School of Music in Van Nuys.
Yes.
That is where I had then, supplemental training, and I also picked a couple of coaches. So every other year, I get coaches here in town, amongst others, Terry Trotter, Frank Sinatra's pianist, and Larry Carlton's pianist, who has the control over the instrument. That's just a dream. I can only just dream of aspiring to the control and the elegance that he has on his instruments. So I continue the training, like every year or every other year, there's a new coach.
I see. So you to this day, you continue to go through some form of training.
Absolutely. You remember, Steve, you and I just spoke earlier about, the lockdown and what it's, how it's affecting us. And as a result of the lockdown, I was able to contact a Brazilian guitar player named Bruno Mangueira, who is, that spells Mangueira, Bruno Mangueira,
Nice.
who is a gifted, beautifully, just an amazing guitar player, and also a gentle and generous human being that was not on tour because of lockdown, and was then able and willing to teach me, you know.
So I think it's fascinating that you've been doing this as long as you have, and I think it's important for the listeners to understand that even when you are have been doing this forever, you still need to practice and train and learn and grow. It doesn't just, otherwise it would go away, wouldn't it? You would forget it all.
I think, you know, one of the things is that I notice as I'm growing as a musician, your harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic repertoire tends to get bigger.
Yes.
New impressions come in, and sometimes it leads to, especially when you improvise, to a little bit of confusion. So every now and then I need to go to my coach and say, let me play this for you. I'm just sort of not being, I have so many ideas in my head that I can't be seeming to channel or shape them right. That's just not my strong suit. Some people have this fluency in the way they improvise. That's not my strong suit. So I go back to my coach. And if you think about it, like, who's sitting on the sidelines with the Lakers? No comparison intended.
Right.
The coach has the overview over the whole thing. That's why the coach needs to be there.
Well, I think it's always valuable it's why you have a director on a movie set. You need someone to give you that feedback, to be that first audience, to tell you, yes, that works, that doesn't work, or to give you suggestions how to improve it.
That's a perfect comparison. That's exactly right.
So, all right, was there a moment in your life when you actually thought to yourself, there was a true transcendent moment where you went, I think I could actually make a living or become a professional at this business of music? Was there a distinct moment?
There was several. One of them stands out for me, and that was, I was working in retail. You know, I had the self-esteem to do retail in a music store. That's how close I was willing to venture to music, and then play, you know, with my own band, you know, do 100 rehearsals and 2 shows. You know, that tells you something. You know, if somebody does 100 rehearsals and 2 shows, they've got maybe just a little problem with perfectionism. But I remember coming across an American musician who had moved to the small town where I worked in that music store. His name is Gary Wiggins, and he's a tenor sax player. Mm-hmm. And there's several Gary Wigginses out here in the U.S., but that's the Detroit Gary Wiggins, who plays blues saxophone and R&B saxophone like nobody I've ever heard before. And he was willing to meet up with me. He came to the music store. And I don't know if it's okay to use a little city slang in this podcast. Okay,
oh, absolutely. Go for it.
All right. I think you might get a kick out of the story. So Gary came to the studio and to the music store right before my lunch break. And my lunch break was 2 hours long, in which I could do whatever I want. So the last client, a customer, stood in front of me, and I was just selling them the drum kit or whatever. And all of a sudden, the room, it was a souterrain, like, you know, there was just neon light. All of a sudden, the room got dark. That's a distinct hue darker. I'm like, did one of those neon lights just drop out? And I turned around. I'm looking at this huge, tall black man who's standing there in a black leather suit, black leather head, black sunglasses, a black saxophone case, out of which he proceeded to take out a black saxophone.
Wow.
And I looked at him and said, "You must be Gary." And he said, "Yeah." We're like, okay. I said, "Gary, give me just 1 second. I'm going to finish up with this customer here, and then we can just talk and get to know each other." So we ended up doing a little jam session for about 10 minutes. I played on the piano. There was an electric piano there, and he played the saxophone. And when we were done, after those 10 minutes, he said words that I never heard before, and I didn't understand a trace of what he was saying because it was such thick Detroit street jargon. Right. He said to me the following words. He said, "Dang, you so motherfucking kind of bad, man. If I was you, would get the hell out of here, go down to Hollywood and become a millionaire. You dig?" I'm going like, "Gary, could you repeat that, please?" He said, "Man, you so motherfucking kind of bad, man. If I was you, I'd get the hell out of here, go down to Hollywood and become a millionaire. You dig?" And I'm going like, And then it took me a little while to understand that, you know, kind of bad meant good, but I got it emotionally. And there's something that I have to tell you, that is the generosity of Americans that came to this town to perform in our city hall in that small town of Osnabrück, Germany, would come to the music store and would always comment. You know, I'd play on a synthesizer and somebody would say something nice. It was always Americans. There was a lot of French people coming in, a lot of English people, lots and lots and lots of Brits would come in and buy instruments or check instruments out. But, you know, they would say, not bad, you know, and, you know, you can't live with not bad. That's just not good enough. How are you going to raise a heart, somebody's courage, you know, the generosity of Americans? And Gary was probably the prime example. And
so he gave you courage through that, then, didn't he?
He gave me courage. Exactly.
It's the not bad is the equivalent of saying to an artist, their work is interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Artists don't want to have interesting work. They want to have work that moves you, that blows you away, that changes the way you look at the world. In a way, an artist has a childlike being inside that needs nurturing. Mm-hmm. You know, and if you go there with not bad, imagine a little child comes to you and shows their first drawing, and you go like, not bad. What's going to happen to that child? Is that child going to ever come back to you to show you more? Or worse, if somebody says to you, that's not very good at all. If they say that to you, it really screw you up for life sometimes. You know?
Exactly. Or you didn't do this right. You know, that's not really a man. That should be, you know, should have arms and legs. And you know, that's just it. You know, the inner encouragement is so profoundly important, or the outer encouragement is important, because we so often discourage ourselves internally. Mm-hmm. You know, with perfectionism, you know, the 3 Ps, you know, perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis.
Yeah, those are not good.
No.
And I have a little bit of the perfectionist thing in my life, and I have to overcome it on a regular basis. And I think a lot of artists do, that you want it to be perfect, whatever that means, because in art, what is perfect, you know?
Exactly.
So it does become a bit of a challenge for many people. As long as it doesn't get you to that last one, the paralysis, you're okay.
That's exactly right. And there's sort of my life's philosophy has kind of shaped itself around that. And I can look, you know, I'll be 61 this year, and I'm looking back over the times when I was an 18-year-old working in a music store, then a 30-year-old being in this country and just not knowing what in God's earth hit me when I'm standing there in that music school at a 108 degrees in October 2000. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, 1991. Mm-hmm. That's when I arrived, and I heard shots ringing through the neighborhood. I'm like, where have I ended up? Oh my God! And in that music, yeah.
Well, you've done very well for not knowing where you were at that time. But that you were not just out of your home; you were in a completely different country. Did you speak fluent English then?
Yeah, with a distinctly more British accent than I'm talking now, but I had some help from a friend of mine, a Hammond organ player from Portland, Oregon, my buddy Greg Perry, who was my fellow student, who I one day approached, and I said, Greg, could you help me with that accent? I don't want to sound like Arnold. And he said to me, are you sure? I said, absolutely. And he said, well, then let me start right here. It's not great. It's great. It's not gorgeous. It's gorgeous. You know, everything's guttural, deeper in the throat, mm-hmm. You know. Mm-hmm. And I still detected, you know, people from here can hear it, that I'm not.
Well, I can tell you, and we're not going to dwell on it, but I can tell that you have a very mild accent. You sound American, except in certain little words. So
it's so bad, Steve, that my folks in Germany now, my high school sweetheart told me the other day, said, it's too late, Steph. She said, you got a big fat American accent.
Well, you do. You have a good American accent. All right. So when did you start to compose? Because being a musician and interpreting other people's music is one thing, but then to create music is another thing entirely. When did you start to do that?
That's a really good question, because as you're asking it, I'm realizing it takes courage to get behind the instrument, but for me, it took extra courage to write, because I just didn't feel I had anything at first that was worth repeating. So I tried maybe writing certain things down. I never really learned how to read. So I'm ear trained completely from beginning to end. And I just now got a little better at reading and writing charts as I have to write charts for my band. But the writing process, I'd say, was already in full swing when I was still living in Germany, except that the lyrics I was writing made absolutely no sense. So if I look over these songs right now, oh my God, if I show this to my friends out here that are pros in the business, they're going to laugh.
Well,
Mhm.
but the music, I think, obviously you need the melding of the two things. You need the words and you need the music. But I think the music is what people tend to latch onto first. And then the words come and they listen to the words, and then the song has a kind of depth to it by having the words on it. But they remember the music first, I believe. Most tendency is toward remembering the music.
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that is the music is sort of like the tribal call for unity. That's what enables you to sit down and focus. You know, otherwise it would be a poem. You know, and
Right.
the music is a very, very strong genetic and tribal call, and the only difference, and that is why Brazilian music is such a vehicle for me. In Brazilian music, you can do something called vocalese. Because, you know, they'll do this, and it doesn't have to have words.
Right, sure, of course. And if you didn't have words to it, it would just be a concert.
Right,
So
exactly.
no music, it's a poem. No words, it's a concert. The two,
Correct.
you need the two things to have a song. And you know that I've worked on and am known for one particular Broadway musical that I wrote the original book and lyrics, and the lyrics are really critical in a musical, far more so than in just a basic song, although they're very important in a basic song. But in a musical, it then carries character and story, so it's a different thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's important that you get those two together correctly, because if they're not, if the words don't fit the music or the music doesn't fit the words, you have nothing basically.
Yeah, it's so amazing that you mentioned Jekyll and Hyde, and I had the pleasure of these many years on the road, almost 18 years if I count back from now to when I started touring with her with Melissa Manchester.
Right.
And Melissa is very, very much deeply invested in musical theater and like the Broadway type productions, and writes accordingly and has writing partners that pursue a lot of these projects. And it was interesting when she one day explained to me, said, Stephan, she said, why do you think people sing in a musical? And we're like, I don't know. Actually, I have no idea what the motivation would be. And she said, well, because they can't speak anymore. The moment the scene has developed to a degree where the words alone would not carry the emotion enough, that's where you just break into song.
There's a further part of that. So let me and I don't want to get too off on a sidetrack here, but there's a further part of that, which is in plays and movies and television shows, we can only deal with two senses, sight and sound. You can't know what's in a character's head unless a character says it or expresses it visually somehow. You can't know what a character thinks. In a novel, you can say, Jack thinks X, Y, or Z, and then the reader can just fill that in his or her own head. But on screen, you can only deal with sight and sound. So the beauty part about a song in a musical is that it can express the internal. It can express what you feel and not what you're actually saying out loud, although you're then singing it out loud.
Right.
So it's an expression of emotion and feelings that you can't otherwise get without giving it dialogue.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. That's valuable. That was already worth the price of admission today.
Well, I've been doing it for a little while, so I have a half of a clue, All right. So I want to get into producing, which is what you do a lot of. In general, when you're getting ready to produce something, do you have preferences of genres or styles that you would prefer to produce, or does it not matter to you when someone comes to you?
Oh, no, it does matter, definitely. It matters insofar as to where I can be of maximum service and where I can really develop the character, around the central story, which is the vocal, the best. I have a very young client, and this goes out of my comfort zone, who is just turned, I think she's going on 19. She's coming in with her dad. Her name is Maya Zakai, very talented girl, who is producing this new R&B that goes closer to hip hop than Ariana Grande's most hip hop oriented tracks. She's going to an area of music where Billie Eilish would be, and into Cardi B and that kind of musical sensibility. And before they came over, and I looked at the tracks I was doing, and I thought, let me see how I can be of maximum help. And thank God, little Maya, or not so little, she's quite tall and beautiful girl. She brought in her own tracks that they get from YouTube. These kids license tracks from YouTube. They have all their beats already when they go to the studio.
Interesting.
And they write music over it. So it's like almost like top line writing. And I one day I said, let me show a couple of the most modern tracks that I've done. And I showed her those, and Maya said, yeah, that's more like the older style of R&B, like India Arie. I'm like, oh, now I want to shoot myself. So in other words, I cannot be of maximum service in a style that I don't really live in.
Sure.
Where I was able to help her is with the vocal arrangements. Like I said, look, we can double this here. We can put a telephone effect over here. Let's do a delay repeat. Let's add something to the beat, or let's even add strings. That's my forte. Everything has to do with harmony, melody, and strong rhythms, as long as as they're within me,
Well, right. It's got to, well, we'll talk about this in a moment, but it's really got to, you're saying the right thing, obviously, that it's got to be from within you.
Yeah.
You have to feel it, not think it.
Yeah. So that's why, a lot of the things are centered around R&B, pop that I do. I'm a big lover of strings, and I adore Johnny Mandel and his string arrangements and on string, the whole orchestral sensibility of Johnny Mandel. That's probably one of my top heroes. And then when it comes to the Rhythm Foundation, working with Quincy Jones, which happened, that came about 7 years ago, due to working together with Jason Gould, Quincy used to always say, like, let's put the track on its feet. And if you listen to Thriller, that Michael Jackson album, you know exactly what he's talking about. There's the beat carries the thing from beginning to end.
Well, yeah. Thriller, and that's the whole album. The whole album has that carried from beginning to end, not just the song.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, all right. So, do you, if I said to you, you could only produce one type of music for the rest of your life, would it be Brazilian music? Would that be the go-to music for you?
Well, the good thing is that Brazilian music is such a wide territory, and it, Brazilian music embodies French Impressionism, African rhythms, Portuguese compositional sensibilities, and so forth. So if I would have to pick only one music, it probably would be Brazilian music.
Brazilian, because you can go off in many directions with Brazilian music.
I can, and it seems also to be like a conduit for emotions for me in the most flowing and direct kind of way.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's very sensual music.
It is sensual and deeply, deeply romantic. And there's shades of emotions that we can express because the language has things in it that cannot be expressed in English.
Oh, well, for sure. Isn't that the brilliant part about all music, though? It transcends all cultures, that if you play a song in English, people in other countries get it. They may not understand the words, but they get the feeling of it. Absolutely.
It's like a tribal call from before from a time when we were maybe still one tribe.
That's, you've said that now a couple of times, and I'd never even thought of that before. I think that's really fascinating, that it is very tribal and very primitive, the nature of our understanding and enjoying rhythms and beats and all those things. That's really ingrained into us in a primitive way, isn't it?
It is, and I guess that there's a saying that I heard not too long ago after going to my yearly retreat, which is a Brazilian music retreat up in the Redwoods called California Brazil Camp. And I cannot even tell you, Steve, like if you go up there as somebody who's never been around this, when you get out of your car and you walk across this campsite under the redwoods, which is already paradise,
Yes.
right there, and there's like this open air amphitheater, and there'll be like 40 percussionists playing in concert, like playing in rhythmic symphony, these Brazilian rhythms, and then a couple of samba dancers go out in front and do their thing in front of them, and then music gets chanted on top of that, because in Brazilian music, very, very often the chant is essential to be added on top of the rhythm. And if you experience the intensity of musicality at work up in that place, you can imagine why we're all heartbroken that it's not taking place this year due to the lockdown.
Well, that and a million other things.
And a million other things, exactly.
Like the theater. I miss the theater.
Oh my God, yes, I can only imagine. It's the same thing for you as it is for us.
It's brutally difficult to get through, but we're going to get through it. We're going to come out of the backside of this, and we'll be stronger for it. Because obviously, when we're recording this in the time of COVID, and things are very different than they were just a mere 9 months ago or so. All right, so how does this work when someone wants you to produce something for them? Do they come to you? Do they find you, or do you seek them out? How does it work?
The odd thing is that literally 99% of my business comes through word of mouth, comes through people who've been in here in my place I call the creation station.
Okay.
It's a creative cockpit. It's a very small space. It's mostly word of mouth, or people who have heard productions in some kind of way. As for example, that phone call I got one day, that was back in 1994. I get a call, and a very youthful voice says on my answering machine, back then when we still had answering machines,
yes,
says, "Hi, this is Burt Bacharach. I heard your music at Bob Feed's office at Windswept Pacific, and I would like to book a session with you." Oof. And I'm going like, oh my God, like, earth swallow me whole, or should I just dance and celebrate? And I started working with Burt, doing a lot of demos for him, all of which ended up on a record, on a 12, I think it's a 12, 13 song CD from a Spanish label called Cantante Sonante. And it's Burt Bacharach, the demos. And the first 4 cuts are all mine. These are the demos from back then.
Wow.
So they must have been sounding okay. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put them on there.
Well, you're talking about a real hero to me. I just think he's possibly one of, if not the best, single pop composers who's ever lived.
I agree, 100%.
The stuff he did with Dionne Warwick and so on, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Promises, he's just an amazing composer. And that you got to work with him, I think is pretty heady stuff. What did you learn from working with him? What did he teach you?
Well, it's interesting. Burt he was very, very, very kind and almost fatherly to me, which I really appreciated, because that's, to me, a super monster hero that walks into your house.
Sure.
Like, oh my God, and he's soft-spoken, and if I play something for him, like a suggestion of a rhythm or something like that, he would sometimes say, "I like it, I don't love it." I'm like, okay, then we have to keep searching. And by the way, when Burt came in, I just switched over from these gruesome digital tape machines called ADATs. That was a format where you had a videotape cassette you shoved into a machine with a very poorly designed drive. And every now and then you hear like a sound that went like,
oh.
And you realize the machine was eating the tape.
Oh, you didn't want to hear that sound.
Oh my God. And then you just race to hit the eject button, pull the tape out, and then this long folded and wrinkled part of the tape would present itself. Believe me, these were 2 years of hell with these machines. But I had just switched over to recording on the computer onto what they call in Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. So Burt was my first client to run a professional Pro Tools session. Back then, we only had 8 tracks. And the singer, Billy Valentine, was in the booth. And Burt had him sing it about, a handful of times, about 5-6 times. And then we went and we took, we did what they call the compositing process, where you take one snippet of vocal, put it into what we call a receptacle track, the comp track. We call it, let's comp this. That's the word for that.
Right.
And then say, oh, you know what, from pass 2, let's take this snippet and put it down into the comp track. And later on, you play it from beginning to end, and you've got this flawless, beautiful performance where the best of the best was selected. What was most conducive to what the lyrics said and what the singer did. And at one point I heard Burt laugh, and I turned around. I was concerned. I thought, man, he must think the computer stuff is such a joke. And I said to him, you don't like the process? And he said to me, I don't like the process. I'm amazed.
He was delighted by it.
He's delighted.
He understood immediately that there was a big advantage to it.
Yeah. The thing I learned, since you asked what I learned from Burt, like, oh my God, it's like opening a book with like 150 magnificent chapters. I remember once that I sent him a Ruff mix. Back then we still had to have couriers. We couldn't just MP3 something. There was a courier would come by and pick up a DAT tape that was then brought to his home. And he calls me up and says, Stephan, like, everything sounds really good. The only thing is, that E flat chord, you're establishing that too early. And I said, wow, Burt, I'm just looking at my screen right now. And, the volume comes up just right as the bar enters. But let me zoom in, and I'm zooming in. And, this is in the middle of all tracks. It's just, the strings are just sort of surrounded with a full drum section. There's horns, guitars, piano. I said, it can't be. And I'm zooming in my screen, and the screen gets wider. And I'm looking at the bar line, and there, just before the bar line, is the volume curve is coming up just a little bit before the bar line. I'm going like, you can't be serious. Ears are like a bat.
Uh-huh.
That's
well, it's like your father with perfect pitch. He could hear
right.
it.
Yeah, good connection. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean,
were you a psychologist in another life, Steve?
I probably was. I don't think I was Freud, but I don't know who I was.
Yeah.
I was going to say he was able to. It's like a great conductor. I'm always amazed when you see sort of rehearsals of great conductors. I had the privilege once of seeing Zubin Mehta in rehearsal with the Israeli Philharmonic, and they hear things that nobody else is hearing. They're just hearing one little bitty thing that's off, and they'll call it out, and you got to do this, that, and you're a beat early, or whatever it is that they're calling out. It's astonishing to watch that happen, because most mortals can't figure it out at all.
That's right. And it kind of, it plays to, or it goes to underline and illustrate that Mehta had obviously a vision, an auditory vision of how the song should be shaped, or how the performance of the concert should be shaped. And when the live musicians were performing in a slightly different way, then he felt, no, let me bring them into that vision. And by the way, that is I don't know if this is a tad bit of a longer story, but I have a profound lesson I learned from a big band arranger and composer named Spock, S-P-O-K, from Brazil, who came to teach at Brazil Camp. Spock is one of the most humble and nicest gentlemen I ever met, who came, a generous teacher who came to Brazil Camp to teach the style of frevo. Now, frevo is a derivative of a marching rhythm that was changed by the African slaves in Brazil into a slightly different shape. It's very fast. It goes like, and then there's music over it, which is very danceable, and then got their colorful little umbrellas, and they dance like crazy. So it's a very famous dance style up in the northeast of Brazil, centered around the city of Recife, and in the state of Pernambuco. And he came to Brazil Camp to teach it, and it's blazingly fast how it's played. So if you play a song that goes like, that means that your improvisation, if you improvise over the chart like that, you can't just play da 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 dee da 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 dee da da dee da. You're going to be tempted to play it in that bebop speed that's really underlying that rhythm.
Right.
So anyways, Spock came in, and in his first class, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're all, we partied till midnight playing Brazilian music and jam session, dancing and drinking a glass of wine or two. And so we were tired in the morning, and here comes Spock with a video projector in his first class. And he plays us a video of the old masters sitting there around a table in Brazil in a rural environment, talking about music and drinking, whatever they were drinking. And the video's dragging on and on and on, and my eyes are closing, they're falling shut. And I'm getting tired. I say, when are we going to play? 15 minutes go by. Now he's there's another video about another of one of the mestris, the masters, another one, an accordion player this time. Another 15 minutes go by. And there's a third master, 45 minutes go by, and now I had enough. Because if I want to sleep, I might as well sleep out on the deck. So I'm going out on the deck, which is where we eat. And, the windows were open to that room. And I thought to myself, I'm going to learn some of the other material. But I was listening in. At the 60th minute of that class, which is just only an hour and 15 long, all of a sudden I heard the band play in absolute perfect synchronicity and harmony and powerful rhythm, and then people started soloing. I ran back into the room. I left all my guitar and all my stuff outside and ran back in the room to witness what was going on. I said, I've never heard the student orchestra ever sounding like this without preparation. And here's the big question, or was there preparation?
Well,
here it is. Spock, by playing those videos, examples of the music, and talking to the masters and showing the environment, he brought everybody to the northeast of Brazil, and everybody had been with him as if for years. And when they started playing, they understood it from the inside. So the vision of the music was imprinted upon them, and they were able to play it because of that.
That's brilliant. That's a brilliant way to teach.
I've never heard anybody teach like this, Steve.
It's, I've been teaching for a while, and it's very rarely the exact words that you say. It's usually something else that triggers the understanding.
Yes.
And it isn't always clear ahead of time what it's going to be, but it becomes clear after the fact. And that's where you can then repeat. So maybe he's done that many times.
Yes, and the weird part is he didn't speak a word of English, so somebody had to translate for him. So it even had to pass the language barrier. But as you can see, just music underflies the radar.
Well, there we go. We're back to that again. Music is this, the cliche is that it's the universal language, which it is.
Yes.
It's definitely it speaks to everybody in some way, unless you're virtually immune to music, which there aren't too many people who are. So
they are not. That's correct.
Correct. All right. So I want to get into production a little bit, because I think it's important for people to understand how this works. Can you name a few of the major things that a producer does that someone outside of the business would have no idea? This is what you do. You wear many hats as a producer, don't you?
Yeah, I'm an engineer by necessity, a producer by desire, and a composer by urge. So the first thing, if you bring a song to me, I would like to understand, let's say if you have a formidable voice and you can deliver it as well, then I would like to, first of all, understand the song and understand it on an emotional level as to where is the focal point of the song, which usually happens as we enter the chorus, or it may be the last line of the chorus in our music. Oftentimes that where what we call the hook is found. And I need to understand the entire flow of that river towards that one point where it goes over the waterfall.
Interesting.
And I need to understand that so that I can orchestrate in a way that makes that point, that delivers that point at utmost service to what the vocal does in the moment. And it could mean that I put a track behind you. If you sing it strong, for example, somebody who sings as strong as Melissa Manchester, I put quite a strong motor under her in the track. I can put like a very strong rhythmic foundation, like put jubilant and soaring strings on top, because I know that the vocalist will be able to carry that.
Yeah, she has a belt like nobody else.
Yes, she does. She does. And she maintains it beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been on the road with her long enough. So that's the first thing, understanding the song on an emotional level. Where does it lead? And then when I know where it leads, I can then go back also, okay, what is the basic feel for the verse? Should that be in rhythm, or is the rhythm constricting the lyric? Does it need to be flowing freely at first, and does it need to be rubato? And then can it go to rhythm, or does the entire song have to be rubato?
Mm-hmm.
I wish that Rosalind Kind, Barbra Streisand's sister, has a song in her drawer, which we finished, and I'm just urging her, so please release it. It's a medley between two songs. God, I always blank on the composer, the gentleman who wrote Hello, Dolly, Jerry.
Oh, Jerry Herman.
Thank you, Jerry Herman. Thank you, God bless you. And Jerry Herman wrote two other songs. One of them is called Kiss Her Now. And then there's It Only Takes a Moment. And those two songs were strung together masterfully by Alex Ryback in New York, the great accompanist and arranger, composer, pianist.
Right.
I think is a genius. And we recorded a version of Michael Orland, who is Rosalind's pianist, at my grand piano here in the studio. And Rosalind was in the vocal booth. And what they performed was so stellar that I was initially resisting to orchestrate it, but Rosalind begged me, said, let's try an orchestration on it. I said, look, the piano is the orchestration. So like if I put strings on top of it, I have to take things out of the piano, So this was a song that's a perfect example of something that could not be in rhythm. It would not have a life in rhythm. All this goes back to the emotional understanding. What is the message of the song, and what ultimately carries the way the lyric is read to its destination, so that it can, that it can enter your heart.
Well, I was going to say, because we've already talked about the emotionality of music, clearly playing music or even creating it requires physical skills. You have to have physical skills, and then on top of it, you have to have some sort of artistic understanding of things, of the world, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's mainly about bringing an emotion out, or putting one in, I guess you could say it that way too. How do you tap into your emotional core? Is there anything that you do? Do you even think about it, or is it just there all the time?
Well, I would say it really helps that I play, in most of the tracks that I work on, and you can see this on most of the recordings that are out by Jason Gould, especially the albums we did before Quincy got involved, because then we got all the A-listers to play along.
Sure.
On top of the tracks that I did, but it ended up still being about a 50% match. It really helps.
You're not saying Quincy has influence, are you?
Huge influence. Like it was, anyways, that was a moment that I'll never forget. Never forget the fist bumping sessions in the studio. Like unbelievable.
So he clearly has a deep emotional root. And it's seriously deep. And so, okay, let me ask the same question I asked you about Burt Bacharach. What did you learn from Quincy Jones?
I think besides a bunch of details, sometimes he'd say to me, Stephan, over there where you have the strings coming in, you're over orchestrating on the strings, and there in that section you're under orchestrating. So I just went back and thought, okay, that's right. I got a keyboard that covers the keyboard, the chord itself, the central chord, and I have a string pad playing the same thing. Maybe I can relieve the string pad from its duty, give it to another texture, maybe the rhythm guitar, which is not, so not two consonant ringing sounds at the same time doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. That was interesting because I'd never produced on that level so diligently. I just threw it together till it sounded good to my ears and my heart, and then I let it go at that. So I got course corrections every now and then, but it's the thing that Quincy's always seeking the groove, the pulse that puts, as he says, that puts the song on its feet.
I'd never even thought of that before you just said that, but that's exactly what his music is. And you can, if you think about all of his recordings and productions, which I only know some of because I don't know all of them, there's always some kind of a real groove going on in just about everything.
Yes. However, he will also be able to give that concept is also transferable over into songs that are just played with acoustic piano and rubato, as long as there is a central pulse to the whole thing. And it doesn't mean that there's a rigid rhythm, but at least there has to be a pulse carrying it. That seemed to be sort of like a preference of his. But, his work is so vast that will only describe just a tiny little sliver.
Of course. And I think it's pretty hard, unless you're a true deep aficionado, to even begin to know his whole canon, because it's huge.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
His catalog is gigantic.
Gigantic.
So when you're in the studio with someone like him or just on your own, how often do you go into a session knowing exactly what you want to accomplish? Or do you usually go in looking to find things in the process?
I would say the first session is very different than session number 2. In the first session, we try to find our direction, and this is the same process for you as you work. Hans Zimmer once said, I am absolutely certain that when you bring your movie to me, I have positively no idea as to how to orchestrate your movie. So you go in with an open mind and you just find out what the singer wants. And by the way, Quincy's always said, and I just meant to add that to when we talked about him the other second or a minute ago, he said, let's ask the song what it wants.
Well, that's just so good.
It's deep, right?
Because it will speak to you, is what he's saying.
Yes. But the thing is that I have to be inspired per se in order to add anything to a track. For example, I remember coming back from my first experience at Brazil camp, where I was drumming the entire, with the ensembles on a snare drum or on the big drums. And I came back to the studio, and we had one of Jason's songs on the workbench. And I said, man, let me try this snare pattern. And I tried a Brazilian snare pattern on it. And that is now firmly, you can hear it. It is the motor.
How do you determine what the right tone is for a song before you start to produce it? You're finding it on the way, or do you have a good idea before you begin?
It's, Steve, it seems that, for example, creating a piano vocal sometimes is a really good way to start to hear where the sort of the ether of the song is. And then if you have gained enough experience, as most of us have when we've been in this business long enough, and we work on inspiration all the time, then you might think, what if we have no rhythm instrument at all? A good example for that is Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell, the new version that came out. Listen to the old folk version, and then the new arrangement. It starts like with a cloud of strings that move. Like that, it's almost that he put like a like he put like a mantra in it that kind of moves the whole song. And then Joni puts that smoky, broken up voice on top. It's absolutely brilliant. It has me in tears every time I hear it.
Me too. That the more recent version that she sings of that song is so deeply emotional. It just like sinks in every single time and busts you up.
Vince Mendoza is the brilliant arranger and orchestrator that put that together.
Very good. Well, that's a good segue for asking you about orchestration and arranging.
Sure.
How vital is it?
Orchestration arranging, to me, is the essence of getting a song out. And sometimes orchestration means we're just using a piano.
Sure. Well,
all of that is orchestration.
Isn't the whole orchestra in the piano?
There is the piano itself. You're absolutely right. Is a full-blown orchestra. But most people, when they call orchestration, they connect it with the word orchestra. So they think, all right, it's either strings or it's winds or horns, right?
Sure. Right. Sure.
Only where supportive, almost like a black and white movie, where in the earlier days when they began hip to being coloring the movies, where for example, having a movie where only one character is in color,
right?
That only where needed and where it supports that color, only where it supports the message just beautifully.
And then further down the road, when you have the full picture in color, you need the colors to complement one another and not be in some way one area of the image is weird and doesn't belong. It all has to be of a piece.
That's exactly right.
And that's the same for music, isn't it? Your orchestration, your arrangement makes the whole thing sort of gel together.
Yeah, and that's why, I mentioned Johnny Mandel earlier. There's actually a YouTube channel that I have where there's one video that's called How to Create a Beautiful orchestrations from the synthesizer in your home studio, but it's tracing down the orchestration by ear, because there's no chart available for Here's to Life with the performance of the legendary performance by Shirley Horn.
Oh yeah.
And it's a 22-minute video. You can find it on my YouTube channel, and you can just watch as I'm kind of unfolding. I'm unwrapping every 4-bar or 8-bar segment with new things happening. Where Johnny Mandel, he has a way of adding flute stacks on top of the strings that just make you want to cry. It's incredible.
Amazing. All right. So what's the process you go through to decide I'm going to put flutes in here, or I'm going to put strings in here, or we're going to drop all that out? How do you make those decisions? Is it all by feel?
Yes, since I'm not a classically trained by the book orchestrator that writes with the pencil and then goes to the orchestra and lets them play it, those people hear the stuff in their heads. I need to hear it coming back from my keyboard. I'm what they sometimes slightly condescendingly call a mouse orchestrator. I heard that term, I swear to God.
Oh, I'd never heard that before. They call you a mouse orchestrator?
Oh yeah, he's a mouse orchestrator.
But all right, so do you mostly compose when you're either composing an original piece or arranging or whatever you want to call it, orchestrating, arranging? Are you doing this entirely on piano, or do you also do your composition work on other instruments?
Yeah, I would say primarily on keyboards, because on keyboards I can create the entire orchestra. Everything is done with, for example, strings requires a keyboard, a volume pedal for my left foot, and sometimes even a modulation wheel or a breath controller, which also uses for horns. So that's a very involved process where you do this kind of deal, right?
Yeah. You're trying to.
But every now and then I might write a song or orchestrate a song beginning with guitar. I did a lot of work for Nashville, and that is absolutely guitar driven.
Well, so you would write the song on a guitar because it's a guitar driven songwriting business, yes?
Yes, especially the idiomatics of that style and what the instrument does and what it invites to sing over. Guitar has a very, very different message that it calls forward than a piano has. It's very, very different.
Interesting. So, all right, we have been, I've been speaking here, having a fantastic time talking to Stephan Oberhoff for close to an hour now, and we're going to wind this thing down just a little bit. And so I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences, whether it was on the road or in the studio or whatever, can you share with us a story that's either quirky or weird or offbeat or strange or maybe just plain funny?
Well, it's a brief one, and it involves one of the great American jazz guitar players, Barney Kessel, who came from, I don't even know if he was a New Yorker at the time, but he came over to do a concert in a small town close to where I lived. And God bless those Americans that would take the trip to and get booked by really intelligent bookers to bring us this music all the way into a small town in Germany. And Barney, which I didn't realize, was playing a heavy swinging style with his, he had I think it was just bass, drums, and guitar. That was all. And they swung, as we say, swung like hell. It was unbelievable. And Barney was wearing a toupee, and since he's bobbing his head in rhythm so strongly, I watched his toupee slowly make its way over his eyebrow till it covered his eyes. He was not realizing it. At one point, he opened his eyes and pushed the toupee back into the position where it's supposed to be, and carried on playing. What he played was so hot and so bluesy and swinging at the same time. I couldn't stand to listen longer than about a half hour. I had to run home, pick up my guitar, and play. So what I wanted to say is, like, when I came to LA, this has happened to me all the time. I would go to one of the jazz clubs that's now long closed, called La Ville. It was down on Ventura Boulevard.
I remember La Ville.
La Ville was you could sit literally at a table right and touch the guy's keyboard or his guitar. It was amazing. And I heard Abram Laboriel and his son play a groove that was so incredible. I listened to 2 more songs. I thought, I got to remember this groove. And I raced home to Woodland Hills, grabbed the beat from the street and put it into my system. And I succeeded. I was able to retain it all the way till I was home. Wow. So it was a 20-minute trip home, racing home. So what I want to say is that what I learned from that is that there are beats being played in the streets that have no way to ever make it onto radio. That's where the grand heritage of American music lies, in the clubs.
For sure. And from the beginning of time.
Yes.
You know, I don't mean the beginning of literal time. I'm talking about the beginning of let's call it the 20th century. It was in the clubs. It was in vaudeville. It was on Broadway, and it was in the clubs for certain. And the truth is, there's been so much music written in the last 150 years that no one could ever even begin to know all of it.
Yes.
Last question for you then. What is the best piece of advice, or do you have a good tip that you can lend to those who are starting out in the business, or maybe in a little bit and trying to reach the next level?
Yes. If you find yourself in the situation that you come up with a cool little, let's say a 3 or 4 note melodic hook, you wake up with it, or for me, it happens a lot when I walk, when I walk between the house and the studio. It's kinetic motion oftentimes that sets it free. If you have that and you record it, you have the wherewithal to record it on your phone, and it keeps playing around in your mind, you might want to stop what you're doing and develop it. Because I had literally hundreds of even tracked, like with drums and bass, these nice little grooves with cool little chord changes, and then never develop them any further. If you walk away from them for longer than maybe an hour or 2, the essence that brought them into your life withdraws as quick as they came. So I had what I call these tiny little spiritual abortions, forgive that term, but they were just never developed into anything. If you can, stick with it, develop it. That's something.
It's akin to a piece of advice that I give out frequently, which is, if you are an idea person, or you aren't sure when ideas are going to hit you, because they can hit you at any time,
right?
You always want to be carrying some form of recording device, whether that's a pad of paper and a pen, or whether it's an electronic recorder of some kind, so that you can remember this. Now, everybody has a cell phone, and you can record into your cell phone. You can write into your cell phone. You can make a voice recording in your cell phone. And so I advise everybody to keep that in mind, because you're correct. As soon as you walk away from that idea, you run the big risk of forgetting it.
Yes, that's so interesting that you give that advice, Steve, because it's essential for me too. And I tell that to my friends who are coming to the studio, said, did you just sketch it? Please sketch it. They sing something to me in the studio, said, don't forget it, sketch it. And they whip their phone out and sketch it. See, when you work on a production, you work on it, you hear the melody so long that it begins to kind of circulate around in your head, and it plays back even when I go to the house, and even when I make lunch or dinner. And oftentimes my obsessive mind, which keeps playing it back till I sometimes can't sleep, it will add orchestrations or melody variations. Those also need to be tracked on that device.
Sure. You need to keep, because you'll forget. And if you're a very fertile thinker, if you've got a lot of ideas, things start to blend together where you can't remember what's what.
Yes.
And over a longer period of time, I can tell you, as I've been around a few years, over a longer period of time, your brain just turns it all to mush. So you have to have some way to distinguish one idea from another.
From the other, exactly.
And so I think that's a really solid piece of advice. Well, did you have something further that you wanted to add?
I was just thinking that if you maybe want to find out, music that you hear that fascinates you gives you permission. Sometimes I hear like a piece of music, we're like, what? You can actually put the background vocals through a wah-wah pedal so that they go wah-wah. What? That's possible? And listening to these other ideas gives you permission. Then when you hear a permission given to you by your own listening experience, apply it to your own music, use it and apply it, try it out. It's one of the kids that I would say is really worth listening to is the young composer and multi-talent Jacob Collier. who is a kid from England who was just signed to Quincy's label, who is a monstrous talent on every level. When you listen to his music that is mostly paired up with video images, you'll hear what I'm talking about. Here's somebody who followed through on every nook and cranny of every idea. Changes the scene into a completely different groove. If that's what it takes, don't be locked into what is on the radio. Don't be locked into that. Give yourself permission.
It's great to be forward thinking, not sideways thinking.
Bingo. Yeah. I love that.
That's very, very good. Well, I cannot thank you enough, Stephan, for coming on StoryBeat today. This has just been so much fun and so many great stories and so much depth to what you do. And I think you will have enlightened many people that may want to go down the similar path that you've been on.
Thank you. My pleasure, Stephen. Thank you for your insights as well. Like I said, you gave me the price of admission somewhere halfway through already. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. Trust me. So as promised, we have a real treat for you now. Please enjoy Stephan's beautiful version of Michele Brourman's great song, My Favorite Year.
Reappearing in my mind. You were right, and I was blind. But that was long ago. And now, do I ever cross your mind? Are your memories like mine? Or have they let you go? After all these loves I lived through, all these years, I had to go so far without you. Now it's clear you were my favorite love. That was my favorite year. And we were young forever yesterday. Fools and little children run away. If we could go back, would we stay? After all these loves I've lived through, all these years, I had to go so far without you. Now it's clear my favorite love. yesterday. Fools and little children run away. If we could go back, would we stay? After all these loves I lived through all these years, I had to go so far without you. Now it's clear. You were my favorite love. That was my favorite year. You were my favorite love. That was my favorite year.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.